Hey there, I'm Jonah Berthelson, and this is Crossfire. Today our contestants are Theo Lucas, representing Hideki Tojo actually, and Jasper Egge, representing Joseph Stalin, in a debate over the most influential leader during the World War II era. And I think Theo's going to start.
Yes, so today we are only going to be discussing Joseph Stalin and Hideki Tojo because Benito Mussolini, first of all, was not as influential as either of these men, and he was very reliant on other people, who like Hitler and Tojo, for protecting his state of Italy.
And then in terms of Hitler was very influential in terms of the war. Without Hitler, the war would never have actually happened. But in terms for effects after the war, his influence was very marginal, if at all. And definitely less so in comparison to these two leaders.
So it sounds like we're down to two. Theo, would you like to start?
Yes, I would. So, Hideki Tojo is most influential because of his attack on Pearl Harbor, which brought the U.S. into the war and caused the war to swing in the Allies' favor and caused it to be a much shorter war.
I think that Joseph Stalin was much more influential due to the fact that after World War II, the United States and Russia immediately got into some sort of Cold War, a nuclear arms race because of Joseph Stalin. We were allies during the war, but afterwards, because of Joseph Stalin's ideas of communism, the U.S. was not pleased, and so because of that, we had the nuclear arms race, for example.
All right. Well, okay, answer me this. How exactly would you describe the most influential? Because obviously you could say who caused the most damage or who did the most in terms of actions, basically. Like who made the biggest impact is the question, rather than who killed the most. Because obviously Stalin murdered more people than anyone else at the time. Theo?
Okay, first of all, I think most influential would definitely be whoever had like the most impact over the war, since the war was very influential. And so Hideki Tojo probably had the most influence because he brought the Americans into the war. And since the Americans came into the war, they added a lot of extra firepower to the Allies' cause, which then, if the Americans hadn't joined the war, the Axis powers might have won, and then this would have changed everything. Like, we don't know how the world would have been today. It could be very much different, and the U.S. might not be a democracy anymore. Europe might be completely fascist. We don't know.
Well, the U.S. was actually already in the war. They were already supplying the Allies with goods and weaponry. They just weren't officially a part of the war because they never had a reason to get involved. Or at least, the people did not want to get involved because there was no actual attack on the United States.
True. But once the U.S. got into the war, they provided many troops, and they're also very influential in D-Day and the invasion of France and getting into Germany.
Well, it seems like this influence of Tojo is only during the war. The influence of Stalin happened much afterwards. I mean, the U.S. has so much weaponry right now because of the Cold War. And we've never used a bunch of it because we thought that there was going to be this huge nuclear war with Russia after World War II, but there wasn't. But we have all this weaponry because of Stalin. Because Stalin was like, guys, we need to build up our nuclear arms because we need to defend communism. Tojo just died after the war. He got assassinated for war crimes. That's not much of an influence to me.
Well, I think that his influence was more in the war, as in, like, he influenced the tide of the war, and then the tide of the war and the outcome of the war then influence the rest of the world. It might not be as obvious as what you're saying, but I think there's still definitely a very big influence that he caused.
Well, it sounds like it's a large influence for both, obviously, and probably larger than the other two that we didn't include. But let's take into account here. So Stalin here, he's he's killing people and all that. He's doing a lot in the war, but what does he really affect after the war ends? Jasper?
Well, besides the fact that there's the Cold War and whatnot, there's also the impact of Siberia, which is where the people who spoke against the government were kept. And Stalin actually killed much more people, much more of his own people than Hitler killed Jews or homosexuals or war prisoners or just people who did not agree with his views. Even today, the government in Russia is not exactly the most stable because of effects after World War II, because of Stalin's idea of communism.
Jasper? I meant Theo, actually. Theo, do you have any rebuttal for that?
No, I think he's very right. He's right on. They
All right.
definitely did have a big impact. Yes.
So, it sounds like everyone involved had a big impact. Now it's up to you to decide. I don't think we have a comment system, but if we do, leave your comment, and we'll count all of the votes. Maybe it's just Mr. Peterson, actually. And then we'll decide who won this debate in Crossfire.